what's the best place to put them?
Great. Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sharing Best Practice Vaccine Emergency Special. I hope you're all doing well and are not super stressed like most people that are currently working in health and social care. We've pulled this together at the last minute as there are obviously lots of questions around both vaccines and visiting and with the constant changing guidance from central government and the lack of clear communication down through local government. We originally had planned to go through the different types of vaccines that could be available because we felt that there was going to be a choice passed out through the Devon marketplace. It appears that that position may have changed through the PCNs being able to select, or the primary care networks being able to select the vaccine they go for. However, it still would be brilliant for us to, we've invited Guy Mozolowski onto the call. Guy, thanks for joining us and giving up your time once again. We really do appreciate it. So I'm going to hand over to Guy in a minute to discuss things about vaccines. But before I do that, there's been a request from an emergency team that's been put together to support care homes with visiting, bearing in mind the guidance that's now been issued and the issue of lateral flow devices, for us to come up as a collective or collaborative with issues of concern and questions that we would like answered. So if we could dedicate some of the time to just pulling together a list immediately after this meeting. I have a meeting again with Devon County Council just to present that list. They are looking for other people to present. So if anyone is free at 4 o'clock for 30 minutes and would like to join a Teams meeting just to put forward some questions to the market management team that we can then pass up to Kerry Story and Jenny Stevens and Tim Golby to say that this is what we'd like answering. And I know one of the key ones is, our Devon County Council supporting the use of lateral flow devices, bearing in mind the statement that's come out from Sheffield Local Authority or Sheffield Council. But I'm sure there are many others. We have listed out about 20 or 25 questions so far this morning that need answering. Our plan for that is to pose the questions of the statutory agencies, and then they have suggested that someone will come and join us on Monday at the scheduled 3 o'clock sharing best practice to hopefully give us some answers. We're very aware that a lot of the guidance has come from central government, and our local authorities have not been provided with any clarity upon that guidance other than what's on the websites. In fact, apparently it was the case this morning that the DHSC email that came out to us about visits and lateral flow devices came to us first before it went to any of the local authorities, which is obviously not helpful. Can I just ask a couple of things? I don't know if you guys are good at using reactions on Zoom. I'm still getting used to all these Zooms and Teams and all these funny things we have to use nowadays. So a show of hands or a comment in the chat bar, how many people have had an email telling them that they've had lateral flow devices are coming in the post? So my services, right? You've all been given a date. Is that date tomorrow or is it later on? Feel free to shout out. Let's make this a very informal call. There's no formality here. So
later on.
Sorry.
Later on, they're going to be delivered.
Later on. So one of my services has an email that says the tests will be delivered tomorrow, but you can't use them until your staff have done the training, which won't be released till the 7th. Is that in line with? I see lots of nodding heads. So we've got until no one can start using these tests until that training is released anyway, which means that we've got the weekend to come out with a protocol. There was a really good suggestion on the WhatsApp group earlier on that we have a defined care home visitors protocol, especially around the donning of PPE and what is acceptable or not. One of the questions that we're going to pose to Guy in a minute that we briefed him on last night was actually what the definition of hand hygiene is. Thank you for those of you that are turning your cameras on. It's much nicer to see a set of faces appearing on the call. Much appreciated. Guy, should we start with you? Are we able to start? Are you guys all right starting with the vaccine and then we move on to visits? Does that work for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's fine. I mean, as I said, really informal call. So if you want to take over, anyone wants to take over at any point, please do. I've not prepared any speeches or anything. Apart from bombarding Guy with questions, that's the only thing I prepared. Yeah, it was you, mate. Should we start with Maxine?
Yeah, I'm going to have to do my presentation backwards, but that should be all right.
You go whichever way you want.
Can I be allowed to screen share for a second? I don't know who's got control.
Ben, can you allow Guy to screen share? Is that something you can do, or what can I do? All participants, there we go.
Right,
You should be able to do that now.
grand stuff. Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, so where I'm from, there's a saying about the definition of Scottish gentleman. That's somebody who can play the bagpipes but doesn't. I'm going to apply the same rules to PowerPoint. I tend not to. Unfortunately, I'm going to some slides at the moment. So give me. I'll try.
Sorry, can't hear you. Yeah, we can't either.
Oh.
You were fine at the beginning, and then your connection seems to have dropped out a little bit.
On mute.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So forgive me for putting slides in front of you instead of the normal protocol. I will try and keep this relatively brief, and then you can just hit me with questions, because I know whatever I've written is certainly out of date given the pace of things I'm moving. And really up front, I can't answer everything. There's a lot of things aren't known at the moment, so I will do my level best and I'll give you my honest opinions. So probably the first thing from the current slide to address when coming to the vaccine, I want to look at this in a slightly broader context in terms of public health. So what I will say straight out, there's probably three things that in the last, say, 500 years have saved more lives than anything else. First one is sanitation. That's obviously proper water treatment and whatnot. The second being vaccination, and the third being the advent of antibiotics. Those three taken together have literally saved hundreds of millions of lives. And one thing to note about two of those in particular is that they are preventative measures. Okay, so they are aimed at stopping the problem in the first place rather than dealing with it afterwards. So that's an important kind of viewpoint to take. And like I say, of the three of them, I would say probably they're in order there: sanitation, vaccination, antibiotics, in terms of the contribution that they made to public health of human society in general. Okay, so just to frame things in that context to start with. In order to help you understand how the vaccines will work at a technical level, from a scientific level, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of science. My apologies for this. The first bit I'm going to come to is molecular biology, and then I'm going to do a brief bit on immunology, and then I'm going to go into the vaccines themselves. So molecular biology, that's basically all to do with your DNA and your cellular proteins and functions and stuff like that. And there's a central dogma of molecular biology that basically states that your DNA codes for all the information that's required to make you. That's then transcribed into RNA, which is then translated into proteins that go off and do the job of being a part of a cell or doing a function, being either part of structure or doing a little chemical reaction or something like that within the body. This process occurs all the time in all of your cells. Okay, so your cells are constantly examining the DNA, reading off the code, transcribing it into RNA, and making proteins that go and do a job or replace a worn out one somewhere in the cell. Okay, that's happening all the time, everywhere. Okay, what a virus does, and indeed the vaccine as well, is it hijacks that process. And what it does is it uses its own RNA to make its own viral proteins that go off and make more virus and go off and infect more cells. Okay, so viruses take advantage of this process that's going on in your cells in order to produce their own proteins to go off and do their own job, which is not in your interests. Okay, so they're, like I say, parasites in a sense. Okay, that's the kind of central process that's involved here. In terms of how your body responds to that infection, obviously there's your immune response. Okay, now the central aim of any vaccine is to trigger the same immune response that an infection does without exposing you to the actual infection. So that's the central aim of it, okay? In terms of your immune response, there's two broad parts of it, okay? There's your innate immune response, and I'll not go into this in much detail, but it's a kind of hard-coded baseline response to things that just shouldn't be there, okay? It's mostly associated with these things called TLR receptors. I won't bore you with them. And like I say, it's mediated through various effector cells. It's associated with what you'll have heard described as a cytokine storm in the press. Again, this is associated with people with severe COVID who may be in hospital. That's the innate immune response, and it's important, but I'm not going to discuss it hugely today. What we really want to focus on is the adaptive immune response, okay? So something called your humoral response, and that is the part of the immune response that learns to deal with emerging pathogens. So I'm just in the chat there. And that's the bit that is essentially key to fighting the virus. In broad terms, that adaptive immune response has two categories or two parts to it that are important, okay? First is your T cell response. So the T cell response is mediated, as it suggests, by T-type lymphocytes. And they basically patrol your immune system looking for infected cells. They kind of wander around looking at bits on the surface of all your cells. And there's a process by which those cells will actually display what's going on within them. And if the T cell doesn't like what it sees, it will trigger a thing called apoptosis, which is basically cell suicide. So if the T cell suspects that the cell is infected with something that it doesn't like the look of, it will trigger a programmed cell suicide to kill that cell, and in doing so, destroy the pathogen that it suspects is in there. Okay, so that's one part of the adaptive immune response. The other part that's very relevant is your antibody response. Okay, so that's mediated by the B lymphocytes of the immune system, and basically the B lymphocytes produce a protein, these little Y-shaped proteins that you can see on the screen in front of you, called antibodies. And what they do is they bind to pathogens, viruses, bacteria, and whatnot. And essentially, as you can see in the little panel 2 there, all they do is gum up the virus and stop it infecting. And it literally does this physically by coating the outside of the virus with the antibodies, and it means that the virus cannot then actually contact the cell that it's trying to infect. So it literally gums up the virus, so it stops it infecting one. And then secondly, as you can see in the bottom 2 panels, by binding to the pathogen, the virus, it targets the virus for what we call phagocytosis, which is basically a white blood cell coming in and engulfing the virus and destroying it by a thing called proteolysis. So it literally chews it up. It picks the virus apart, amino acid by amino acid, and destroys it. So those are the 2 parts of the immune response that are particularly important toward in terms of actually responding to the virus. So what we want in essence is to generate that immune response from the adaptive immune system, both antibody and T cell response, but we want to do it without giving you the damn virus, okay? Because that is obviously hugely risky, and you know what I mean? So that is the aim of vaccination, okay? So try and move on here. One more slide. So what do we have in terms of vaccine technologies? So you'll be aware that there are now 3 vaccine candidates that have passed all but the very final stages of phase 3 trials. And I think there's one currently that was approved by the MHRA as of last night. I believe that's the Pfizer BioNTech, but like I say, I'll wait and see. I won't comment on government policy. So basically, of the 3, they fall into 2 groups. The first being mRNA type vaccines. That includes the Pfizer BioNTech offering, which we're likely to be getting first. And it also includes the Moderna offering, which I don't know whether we'll see broadly used in this country at all, but we shall wait and see. So that's mRNA vaccines. The other one, and we're probably all familiar with this from the news, and I have some personal involvement. I certainly know the people involved, and I can talk to this in detail in a few more slides. That's the Oxford and AstraZeneca offering, and that is based around an adenoviral vector, and I'll come to what these terms mean shortly, okay? So like I say, 3 vaccines, broadly they fall into 2 technology buckets, okay? Where we go, come on, next slide. Okay, so the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccine, these are the mRNA vaccines. How do they work? Okay, so as I referred to in the slide before, you've got your normal process of DNA being transcribed into RNA, which is translated into protein, okay? What the vaccine seeks to do is, without giving you, basically introducing all the genes that are required to make a coronavirus, which would obviously be dangerous, it'd be giving you the disease. What they want to do is they want to give you a small stretch of one bit of the virus's RNA that will then get turned into virus protein within your cell that will trigger the aforementioned antibody and T cell responses within your body, okay? So it's actually doing the same thing as the virus, but it's doing one tiny bit of it. It's slightly out of context, but I will go back and I'll actually talk about the roles of these various proteins in a little bit. The spike protein, if anybody actually has seen the kind of micrograph pictures of the virus on the news, you've got essentially a beach ball with spikes coming out of it. That spike bit, the red beach ball and the blue sticky outy bits, that's the protein that it's expressing. So basically the mRNA vaccine introduces raw mRNA into your cells, and your cellular machinery then makes virus protein, which then sets off the immune response, both the antibody and the T cell, and that gives you the lasting immunity that we desire without obviously giving you the infection itself, okay? So that's the mRNA vaccine. The adenovirus varies slightly from this. It still uses the same principle of using the spike protein to generate an immune response. However, it delivers that in a slightly craftier way, in my opinion, okay? So what Oxford have done is they've taken another virus, an adenovirus. Adenovirus is responsible for common colds, and like I say, the one they have chosen is one that most humans have not been exposed to previously. So it's new to us and we don't have existing immunity to it. Adenovirus has about 25 genes in it that's required to make all the relevant bits to put an adenovirus together. And they've removed all but 3 of those genes. So it lacks all of the machinery that is required to make more of itself. In place of those genes, they've popped a little bit of coronavirus RNA that codes for, as I mentioned before, that spike protein. They've put a little thing in front of it called a leader sequence. That leader sequence is for a thing called tissue plasminogen activator. That's relevant because TPA is expressed in all of our cells. And that means that quite literally you can stick this in any part of the body and it will work, okay? And that's why they've chosen TPA, because it's a thing that's ubiquitously expressed in all of our body tissues, okay? Your cellular machinery thinks it's about to make some TPA, but downstream of the TPA sequence is actually a little bit of sequence for the virus spike. And basically your protein expression machinery gets fooled into making the spike protein. That spike protein then kicks off the immune response that I've described before, both the T cell and the humoral, and that generates your lasting immunity, okay? So those are the core technologies that are behind this. And like I say, that's how they work, right? The next thing I'm going to come to is the burning issue of safety and approval. I'm going to come out up front and say corners have not been cut with this, okay? You have to acknowledge the speed that this has been done with, okay? It has been an extraordinary effort. One of the main differences between what has happened in the last 9 months, 10 months, and what would the normal process would be, is that all of the things that would be done have been done normally have been done. Some of them have been done concurrently, and the big difference is that normally between each one of these phases, there's 2 to 3 years of sitting around doing nothing, begging for more money, trying to arrange further trials, talking to regulators, generally just admin and messing around. That has obviously been blown out of the water. So I'll say upfront, all the things that would have been done for every other vaccine have been done, and they've been done well, and they've been done robustly. I have to make clear that the level of scrutiny that this is under is extraordinary. The number of sets of eyes that are watching this and looking for anything wrong is enormous. So what's been done has been done quickly, but it's been done properly, and it's been done well. And like I say, there are no end of parties looking for anybody to put a foot wrong here. So like I say, corners have not been cut. Now, the second point here, and I can speak only to the Oxford vaccine because I know personally a number of the people that have been involved in the Jenner Institute. I know Professor Adrian Hill. Yeah, a friend of Professor Sarah Gilbert and Professor Theresa Lamb, and I can say personally that they are individuals of the most unimpeachable integrity. They're exquisitely good scientists, and their belief and dedication to their work is something that has to be seen to be believed. So I mean, for what it's worth, I can personally vouch for the people that are behind this. Okay. The other things that I want to draw attention to is the independent mechanisms of scrutiny that are in place, that are mandated within the trial structure and the governance structure. One of the most important is the independent data monitoring committee. That is an integral part of any trial, and those are an independent body of scientists and clinicians who basically are in charge of the data itself. They are the only people that can unblind data, and like I said, they are not influenced. They are unable to be influenced by the pharmaceutical company who has generated the vaccine. They're independent of any of the academics that have been involved with the development of the vaccine. They're independent of the regulators, and they're independent of the government. They are not influenced by any other parties, and I can safely say that it's a very, very effective mechanism of governance. The next thing I would draw attention to is the independence of the MHRA, and basically their role in all of this. So the Medicine and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, or what known as the competent authority within this country, they are the body that is in charge of regulating all medical device and therapeutic activities within the country. They are the equivalent of the CQC, but with regard to, like I say, medical devices and therapeutics. So they're the body that is responsible for upholding standards of the actual materials that are being used within healthcare. Their offices in central are located in central London, and like I said, they are an extraordinarily dedicated bunch. I have a love-hate relationship with them because they really do hold me and all what I do to account. They, I have to say, create a lot of work for me, and I pay for the privilege. But I will safely say, despite all of that, I sleep safer in my bed at night knowing that these guys are out there watching and wait for anything that looks like irresponsible behaviour within the healthcare arena. So, yeah, I have to say the concerns about the safety of this vaccine, while there are no absolute certainties, I can assure you the level of integrity and scrutiny involved in this process has not been compromised by the speed or any political pressures. So, like I say, at that point, I'm probably going to leave it for the vaccine and open it to questions. Like I say, I've got a bit more of a presentation to do with regards to testing and whatnot, but we can get to that later. I think probably better to hand over to open up to questions at the moment. So,
Guy, can I step in? Thank you for that, and that's really useful. One of the burning questions that I've got, and I think maybe we touched on yesterday, we have many of our staff group are young, and a question that I've had a lot is that, Shred, I'm 23 years old, 25 years old. If I take this vaccine, how do I know I'll still be able to have kids in 5 years' time? What is the long-term impact of this vaccine on us?
Right. So I cannot offer absolute certainty on this. Like I say, that is simply not possible. What I can say is that there are no known instances of vaccines causing any side effects that relate to long-term infertility. The things that people are most concerned about, and I think rightly so, are things like Guillain-Barré syndrome, the obvious and, like I say, known occurrence of things like transverse myelitis, which happens with viral infections anyway. But like I say, there isn't anything to my knowledge that's linked to fertility and things. So it's a case of I simply don't know how that would work or be a thing.
Okay, second question for me before I open it out, that my understanding from the UK trial of the adenovirus vaccine from Oxford AstraZeneca was that there were 12,390 participants, of which 139 experienced symptoms, of which 100 were actually from the placebo group. And none of the 139 that experienced symptoms actually required hospital treatment. Have I got that right?
That's exactly correct. So the safety profile of the Oxford vaccine it's been extremely well tolerated. The principal side effects that have been reported across the group, across age groups, are mild fever lasting 1 to 2 days. So that'd be your kind of classic pyrexia, mild local soreness in the arm. And but I say there have been a percentage of people, I think it's around 30 to 40%, that have reported fatigue for 1 to 2 days afterwards.
Right. Okay. Guys, did anyone do this? Please feel free. Has anyone got any questions they want to put forward around the vaccine? Marcus, go for it.
I was just going to ask, in terms of pregnant staff, I looked on a BBC site that suggested it wasn't recommended for people that are pregnant or are planning to be pregnant within the next 3 months. Is that the official thing or just BBC's perspective?
I believe it's not been cleared for use in pregnant women. Like I say, right. To give you a bit of perspective on the way the trials are approached, everything is based around reduction of risk. So, for example, when they your phase 1 and 2 is nothing to do with does it this. At that stage, you don't care if the vaccine works. You need to know it's safe. Okay, so the first people they put it into are the people kind of at lower risk, so they will cohort. So that would be your 18 to I think 55 was the first people that got it in their arms there. Then they'll start extending into older people, then younger people, and then the very highest risk group are pregnant women. To be because, like I say, you know, immunology is hugely complex, and like I say, they will not take that step starting to gather data until they are quite well advanced in the phase 2 trials of the normal low-risk cohort. So it's a case of it takes time to actually gather the data on that would say it's safe for pregnant women to get the vaccine, because they're very cautious at actually giving it. So basically that will come late. It's unfortunate, and instinct says you really want to protect these the people the most, pregnant women the most. You know what I mean? It's inherent, but the risks of something potentially going wrong are far too high for people to rush that. Again, that's the mark of the kind of the level of caution and the level of kind of risk averseness that is inherent in the process.
Can I ask a secondary question? In terms of members of our staff team that have contraindications, if you like, sort of risk factors of their own, are there any other risk factors, for example, diabetes or other heart conditions, etc., that would be something that we'd be wary about giving the vaccine to, or are those the areas that you would say go for it because it's more important that they have it?
Well, instinctively, you would want to protect these people. Like I say, I'm gonna have to refer you to the manufacturer's information on that one. I couldn't.
Does anybody know which vaccine we're due to get in our care homes? Because that's actually quite important to me.
I can tell you. I spoke with the local GP surgery last week here in Seaton. She's indicated the government have told her it won't be the Pfizer. The Pfizer has complexities around storage. They're also finding that when it's coming out of being frozen, that it's separating.
Yeah.
So they're indicating there's a separate issue to be dealt with prior to it being given. So, and also the Oxford's cheaper. So her indication was that it will be the beginning of January, and it will be the Oxford that they're going to be offering the care homes, no matter what the media are telling you.
I mean, which PCN do you fall under down there? Or which is your doctor's practice?
It's Townsend House in Seaton, so I presume it comes under northeastern.
Right. So one of the bits that we need to collect, because it doesn't appear the system's got the information yet, is across all of our GP practices. My understanding from the CCG this morning was that it's gone out via the primary care network, which in themselves are so infantile that they're having to pull themselves together. So they've got the choice of which vaccine, and as you say, most of them seem to be reporting back to use Oxford for exactly the reasons that you just said. But then it's about their rollout mechanism, and then who is taking responsibility for consent. We've got Rosalind Aslam, the consent lead from, I hope I said that name right, from the CCG, coming on Monday's call to talk to us about consent and how we're applying that in Devon. I haven't managed to get an answer from anyone this morning. I don't know if anyone else on the call has, around the rollout of which staff are being trained, and does it have to be PCN staff that are coming in, or can our own staff be trained up to do it? Has anyone heard anything on that front?
So GPs, the GP surgery indicated their practice nurses will be coming.
Right, and do you know if we can have our staff trained, or does it have to be theirs?
I told her 2 of our staff are anaphylaxis trained. One of them has already done this year's flu vaccine training.
Yeah.
And I just suggested that we could support them in that, if that was helpful. We're only a little home, so if you've got a massive home, I can see how having your own staff trained. And I would think under the RCN, if you look at the RCN detail, there's no patient. You don't need a patient group directive for adrenaline in the home if you are vaccinating. So I would have suggested that as long as that was in place, I don't see why we couldn't.
Well, Southern Healthcare were talking about sponsoring a vaccination team for all the care homes in Devon.
Jeffrey's gone pale, Sharon. Gone pale.
Sorry, any other questions for Guy?
Could I ask, in terms of trialling a vaccine, how can you predict what the side effects may be in the future? So rather than the immediate side effects, what are the predictors of the mid to long term side effects? How do you find them?
So one of the things that we do, well, that is done to basically deal with that is we look at historical precedent. So we look at the frequency of things that have been observed in the past with past vaccine, like I say, Guillain-Barré and whatnot, and that dictates the size of the trial. So very, very kind of long term, you can't say for sure until you wait. But one of the ways you mitigate that problem is by doing a very, very large trial. So anything that's very rare and unusual, but still caused by the vaccine, will show up in the very large trial. So in practical terms, that means that a minimum of 30,000 people have to get it to basically establish its safety. Like I say, the baseline level is around the 30,000 mark, and that is significantly above what, you know, statistically you would need anyway. So they set the bar high. Then what they've gone and done is you actually see in the final phase 3 trial results, you see they're coming in around the mid 40,000 mark, nearly 50,000 in each trial, if you know what I mean. So again, that's prudence. They didn't want to shoot and just miss, if you know what I mean. So they over-egged it because of the urgency and stuff like that. So what they've done is they've gone and collected an enormous sample of people. You can't rule out that there may be very rare, very things way down the road that cannot be ruled out. However, you can massively mitigate hugely increase your chances of detecting that at the trial stage by doing a very, very large trial. So it's literally, there's nothing clever about it. It's just you've got to do a lot. Do you know what I mean?
Have both types of vaccine have the same numbers involved in the trials? Equal numbers? Yeah.
Like I say, they're all shooting in kind of well above the 30,000 mark, kind of between I think total around 38 to about 45 thousand would cover the numbers in the 3 respective vaccines, the Moderna, the Astra, and the Pfizer is what I've seen. Like I say, this will be ongoing. Like I say, they'll continue to enroll people, the trials continue to go, and they'll continue to monitor people for years and years afterwards as part of the required due diligence that they need to do. They need to know. And the only way to do that is to collect the data. And they have to do it. They're required to do it. They have to be seen to do it. And like I say, you've got so many eyes watching everybody. And, any foot wrong. I mean, you saw already... I mean, the Oxford trial was paused for a couple of weeks at one point. Now everybody went, and rightly so, this needs to be investigated. But if you take 30,000 people off the street, one of them is going to get sick now and then. Do you know what I mean? And it needs to be very carefully looked at whether or not that's linked to the virus. And like I say, all these independent data review teams, that's exactly their job. And like I say, the stakeholders in this have no influence over them. They can't touch them. These guys are gods, if you know what I mean, in terms of their power over the trial. So they don't like it. It's not going anywhere, if you know what I mean. So that's why they do these huge trials, and like I say, that's why they take the care and time over this kind of thing. So no absolute certainties, but they're doing everything they can to make sure that it's safe.
Oh, thank you.
Guy, do you know what the demographics were in the trials? So were there a lot of older people included in the trials?
So particularly in the Oxford trial, they've actually actively waited. Obviously, it was at a delay because they did the low risk people first, the kind of 18 to 55s, but they actively included a large arm. Now, I can't quote the numbers off the top of my head, but was looking at the 55 to 85 to 85 cohort. So that's important because the MHRA is going to want to see that in terms of the demographics. And like I say, I think what was behind the announcements last night, it's wrong because it's been a hell of a 24 hours, that the Pfizer one's not going to be given to the older demographic. I think that maybe maybe the cause of that, i.e. the MHRA doesn't have the data to give it the thumbs up. Annoying, but I would also say reassuring. Is a sign that they won't say yes until they've got enough data. So I don't know, again, that's another indicator of the scrutiny and the rigor that's inherent in this process. So yeah, to answer you, yes, there have. I think somebody's just popped up and answered over 85s. I can't quote the numbers off the top of my head, but I know Oxford were actively pursuing the older cohort because they knew it was going to be an issue. And again, it's maybe what lies behind the announcement last night that Pfizer isn't being given the nod for the older demographic.
To really put you on the spot on that one, then, that off the top of your head, how would you respond to a family? So this context, this week reported that the efficacy of the virus in the 18 to 65-year-old group was higher than the efficacy in the 65-year-old plus group, but they failed to release efficacy data numbers to tell us what the differential was. So if we have a family that's read that news report and said, well, it's not going to be as effective for my parent, and I don't want them to go through the potential risk of becoming pyrexia and having some pain for a week, how would you respond to that?
Oh, I mean, I think everything has to be viewed through a kind of a prism of the risk to the individual, and I have to say that for me, the balance of risk. I mean, pyrexia and discomfort is one thing.
Yeah, okay, get your drift. So then
it's not really a choice. Do you know what I mean? I may be biased in that thing, but yeah, it just, the risk profile is so strongly weighted in terms of get the damn vaccine.
So what percentage? It's my understanding that to achieve herd immunity effectively in a community, we need to be hitting 80% of that entire community. Is that correct?
Yeah, 80, 85 is where you need to be at. You'll start seeing robust protective effects anywhere north of 65, but you really want to be up at 80 odd.
Okay, so we started, maybe just for the benefit of others on the call, that the reason we started down this road within Evolve was that we did a staff survey and hit 47% indications from our staff group that they would actually take this virus. Guy kindly helped us write an education pack last week, which upped it from 47 to 75% on the latest staff survey, but we're still not there. As part of the Vivaldi study for blood draw, we had only 33% of families consented to their relative participating in any form of experimental or research-based approach. So if we, in terms of a target to get to our herd immunity target, we've got to get to 85% of our total community. Is that right? Yeah,
that needs to be the target. Like I say, you will start seeing robust protective effects within the community around 65. But I have a personal concern about the 2-dose regimen, and like I say, I think it speaks to the idea of having local vaccination teams, because compliance with this 2 doses, whatever it is, 28 days apart, making sure people actually get that. I mean, you could get 90% get the first lot, but then if you lose 10 or 15 who don't turn up for their second dose and stuff like that for me is a concern. I think you're right to be thinking about having some form of local support, because it will increase or it will decrease that drop between the compliance with the 2-dose regime, if you know what I mean.
I think the GP surgeries equally have those concerns, because they were being told by the NHS if people didn't get their second dose, they weren't going to be paid. So I think the GP surgeries are going to be fighting quite hard for the second dose people turn up. I believe personally that they should be fined. If people don't come for the second dose, they should be fined, because they are taking a dose away from someone else who potentially could get life benefits from it.
That's a fair point. Sorry, Emma, did I hear you say that if the practitioners won't get paid if their patient doesn't take both doses? Is that right?
Yeah. That was the indication from the GP I was talking to. Said they were in talks.
Right.
It's been indicated if the second dose wasn't given, they wouldn't get paid.
Nothing like a performance-related healthcare network.
There's your carrot. Or you stick, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
We should introduce that for home management remuneration, performance-related.
Can I ask a little question?
Go for it.
I've heard that you have to have had the flu vaccine before you can be offered the vaccine against COVID.
As far as I know, that's not true, but it is preferable to have both of them because we're facing, like I say, a tough old winter.
I know, I understand that. It's just that I have quite a few staff that haven't had the flu vaccine, but, you know, I sort of like saying, yes, they'd go forward for the COVID vaccine. And I said, you need the flu vaccine first, or that's what I've heard.
I have not heard anything to that tune.
No.
I know it, but just, yeah, encourage them to get both.
Yeah.
So I read in the AstraZeneca guidance this morning that this vaccine cannot be combined with another vaccine, but the recommendation is for not to combine, even though the likelihood of interference is low. But it doesn't say if there is to be a flu vaccine, what's the differential in days or the space apart between the two vaccines should be. Is that something?
I can tell you, the answer is 7 days.
Sorry, Marcus, I didn't hear.
The answer is 7 days.
So 7 days between flu. The answer, but so 7 days between flu and the first COVID jab.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Marcus. I was lost there.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any questions for Guy on the vaccine?
Yeah, just from an operational point of view, are we getting all our staff vaccinated on the same day? Or is there a need to actually phase it? So just in case all the staff come off sick?
Yeah, instinct would say that ideally you try and get them all done in as short a time window as possible. However, I think practicalities like shift work, not having everybody, the entire workforce on site at a given one time will necessitate probably a couple of runs at it in each premises. Like I say, the logistical at this stage, the logistical considerations are definitely something. Yeah, that's going to, it's not going to be as easy. So start thinking about them now. Start thinking about how many sessions you're going to need to cover the entire workforce with your individual shift patterns and stuff like that. Because yeah, the logistics, like I said, kudos thing, compliance, having the right resources, all of that is linked. It kind of sits together and is linked in. So I can I can definitely say that you put some thought into how your circumstances is going to work with in terms of sessions and stuff like that, and logistics and compliance with the 2 doses.
It may be also worth thinking about, Eddie, that in the vaccine conversations that take place thus far, obviously the potential side effects equate to COVID symptoms or soft signs. So the requirement to have an amnesty for COVID isolation in the 48 hours post the vaccination group, that obviously presents an outbreak risk, because we'll never know if that is the pyrexia or lethargy or body aches are down to soft signs, or we won't know at the time, rather. So it's about taking that risk. And I did raise that question in the vaccine group, and there wasn't an answer to, should providers provide a symptom and soft sign amnesty for that 48 hours, or should it be 3 days or 5 days, because different people react differently to the vaccine?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, I've got a silly question for Guy. Those of us that have already had COVID already have T cells which are presumably responding appropriately. Is that going to impact on the vaccine when it's given to me? Because I'm already going to spot it and kill it before it has a chance to replicate.
Right. Jury is still out on exactly the effects. However, historically, looking at the behaviour of other pathogens and vaccinations, when somebody who's already had it gets given the vaccine, the general trend is for an even more robust immune response. Yes. So you've had it and then you get the vaccine, you get your immune system tickled again, and I hate to coin a metaphor and to over egg the pudding, but yeah, the stuff be bouncing off you. Yeah,
please do that. And do we know how long the symptom of the protection is likely to last?
Again, jury is still out. What they've been able to do is, obviously you don't know until you've waited the time, and it's only so that's unknown. However, what they are able to do is they're able to model based on similar diseases and whatnot, if you have a level X of the antibody that everybody, so you give everything on antibodies, there's 5 flavors, and there's one that really matters. It's called IgG, and it's the one that it kind of rocks up a bit later, but it's the one that hangs around for ages in your body. Based on the IgG titers from the people that have been immunized, the Pfizer lot reckon they've got at least a year. Now, you'd want to do better than that, and it may well do. What I would say is that the technology behind the Oxford vaccine, using that adenovirus as the vector, the adenovirus, the reason they picked that is it has a reputation, rightly so, for basically kicking off the immune system hard. Do you know what I mean? There's certain diseases that kind of sneak in and kind of get below the radar. Adenovirus just knocks on the front door, leaves big muddy footprints everywhere, and do you know what I mean? Like, leaves a real mess behind it. What they've done is they've basically taken, obviously, the bit of the coronavirus and put that inside the adenovirus. So the theory being that you'll get the long-lasting immune reaction to an adenovirus, but it's targeted specifically at the coronavirus. So we're in a position where we don't know yet, we might get a much longer lasting immunity from the vaccine than we do from the disease, which would be great. And there's I'm not a betting man, but there's a strong chance that may be the case with the Astra Oxford one. We don't know yet, is the truth. So yeah, jury's out, but it looks pretty good.
Were there people that were in the trial that had already been positive? So, in the actual trial figures, were there people that had been formally positive and people that were suffering from long COVID?
Right. I'll have to look back at the trial protocols. I can't remember if they excluded people from the trial if they showed up, because there's pre-screening for trial participants, so they get bloods and all that taken. I can't remember if they excluded people who had already had it or something.
Because I must admit, one of our homes unfortunately got hit very early on, before COVID was really an issue, and we've got a high number of staff and residents that either swabbed positive or latterly had positive antibodies, because we were really lucky to have the whole home antibody tested. And there's a lot of uncertainty and reticence through the care staff and the residents' families about the vaccine being tested, being put through on people that had already formally tested positive.
I'd have to read the trial protocols. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't tell you, but I think I read certainly in 2 of them that basically we did the pre-enrollment screening. If you came up with positive serology antibodies, then you wouldn't. They just said, look, we can't. You know what I mean? You can't tell us what we need to know, if you know what I mean, because you would potentially bias the data in the trial. So we're just not going to let you in the gate. What I would say is, I'd refer back to what I said to Marcus about people who've already had the disease before. Subsequent immunization, in the vast majority of cases I'm aware of, has led to an even stronger, more robust immunity.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question? My understanding is that it is 2 weeks. You don't have complete or the full protection of the vaccine until 2 weeks after the second dose. That's part 1. Is that correct?
I think that 2 weeks for Oxford. I think the trial, the point that they measured in the Pfizer one was, or the Pfizer BioNTech was 7 days. So you're looking, depending on which one.
Between a week and 2 weeks, then.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we have the 85% of staff residents take up the vaccine, and we manage to get to that, which is a different question, but if we manage to get to that, does that mean that 2 weeks after the last person who got the vaccine has their second dose, or a week or 2 weeks after, depending on which vaccine it is, that we don't need PPE as much as we used to in the home, and we can walk around without masks or in the home, or are we risking it even then?
Right, so I'm not going to stick my neck out too far on this one. What I would urge, and again, it's just the risks right now are complacency, like before we've got it in anybody's arm, if you know what I mean. So, do you know what I mean? In order to not encourage that, I think we, you know, from a leadership point of view, I think we need to, you know, still be really strict on PPE and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say yes, a significant relaxation can occur, but you know, it would be difficult. It would be dicey to say, yeah, just go back to normal completely. Like I still think, you know, your basic infection control principles should remain in place. Like I say, I mean,
until when? Because that's what visitors are going to be asking. Because that's what visitors are going to be asking.
So well, I think that, but if you think of it from a herd perspective, that our community really shouldn't be relaxing. Maybe this is a personal view that I'm putting out there, but quite a strong one, that we shouldn't be relaxing any infection control protocols until we've received herd immunity as a community at large, as opposed to our micro communities as care centres, because the risk of it coming in, even the virus mutating and living on cardboard and coming in through a delivery coming in, and if we've relaxed our PPE inside, we've reduced the protection of the people inside our buildings, and an outbreak will then just emerge. I can't see how. Yeah.
I think there's certainly.
Sorry, I was just going to respectfully suggest that you use that as a way of putting pressure on your staff and families to take the vaccine, because if you're saying that you will not relax your mask wearing and your infection control measures until you have a minimum of 85%, then it puts pressure on your staff, because they don't want to be wearing those masks forever. Yeah. So the more of them that do say, well, I've had my vaccine, so until you have yours, you're not going to be, you're stopping me from being enabled not to have the mask on. You're putting pressure on, you're actually using those people that are prepared to have the vaccine to put pressure on those that are more reticent.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we ask the view of the infection control expert on the call? Ness Carter, what's your view?
What, on releasing PPE?
If the community is vaccinated to a herd extent, so somewhere between 65 and 85, before the wider community is herd vaccinated, what's the view on removing PPE
for me,
or reducing PPE?
For me, and this really is putting me on the spot because we've not had this conversation, I'd want to link it to the zoning. So if for the people in the care home that have got comorbidities that make them much more susceptible to the virus and to be very poorly from that, I'd actually want to zone in that way down to comorbidities and to relax measures for people that have the minimum risk of being very unwell with it as much as we can, and do it in a very controlled way. I would certainly not be happy taking PPE, even if we had, no, it needs to be controlled. We've all come too far. So to me, that's quite a long programme.
Okay, any other questions?
Would you do that even though you know all your residents have been vaccinated?
I think, yeah, because it's not 100%. It's a bit like, if it's like the COVID swab, isn't it? It might be 97% now, but we still support people into isolation for 2 weeks post a hospital appointment, whether it's an overnight stay or not, because we haven't got 100% guarantee. And that's the same with the vaccine. So for me, the step down programme would be to link that to zoning and to link it to people that would be classed by the government, for example, is incredibly vulnerable to Shield, and do it that way.
Can I also point out that you have a duty of care to your staff that haven't been vaccinated?
Absolutely.
So that
yeah.
if you're in a situation where you've got an 85% take up, the other 15%, presumably a proportion of those will be pregnant, as I just suggested earlier. Yeah. And as a consequence, they are potentially at risk. And if you're then relaxing your protection because your residents are safe, you're still potentially not exercising your duty of care to the remaining staff.
I think the staff and people living in the home, it's all viewed as one, isn't it? The measures have to protect both, because our staff go home to their families and friends, and without them we can't run that home. So absolutely they need to be viewed in the same way. And it's the same way, for example, in an outbreak home, you know, I shared with you a couple of weeks ago that we have those risk assessments and certain staff are not, you know, supporting people that are COVID positive because we have that duty of care to staff. And I can't see the step down programme of this being any different, or it shouldn't be any different in my view.
Could I ask for a show of hands or somehow that who would be up for developing a care home wide protocol that we are pre-agreed upon, so that I see one of the external factors that professionals, families, that say that every home's got a different protocol, whereas if there was to be some level of common agreement, is that something people would be up for developing across the sector? Or yeah, okay. Good. Are there any other questions for Guy? Okay. Right.
I've got one for Guy on the testing.
Go for it.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
On the lateral flow, is there an unclear result, or is it negative and just positive?
Right, so you've got negative, positive, or void. If you don't get that control line, the green line, that test, you can't trust the result on it. Bin and redo.
Right.
For
example, if say one of the staff who were doing the testing maybe didn't do it properly and there was nothing actually on the swab, and it was just basically the fluid, what would that throw up as a result?
So that would show it was if you didn't do the swabbing right, but you did the rest of the test right, if you know what I mean, in the right fluid and the right number of drops and the right number of time, that would show as a valid negative test. Okay.
As a negative test.
If you don't,
even though we haven't put the swab in. Wow.
So that's what I'm saying. Do the sample.
I mean, that's, for me, that's quite a major issue when we're talking about trying to set up the test. Because we've got to train staff to do it. And then the question is, our staff are reticent to actually do the swabbing bit on the visitors. So we might ask the visitors to do the swabbing. And if they don't do it, you know,
right.
they do it, you know, don't bother doing it, but then give us the swab and we put it in.
Well, then you have to have a 15-minute training course before you can do the swabbing anyway. So unless your residents' families have already done the training course, then they can't do their own swabbing, can they?
But even if they did the training course, what I'm saying is the resident relative might not actually swab correctly.
In which case, it's got to be facilitated, Eddie. You're going to have someone there that is monitoring that and facilitating those swabs. Because that's what I would want. I would want to know that someone competent was there watching if they're going to do it themselves.
Has to be supervised.
And that's one of the questions that's gone directly to Kerry's story in this morning, is the addition of staff, that the staff time that's going to be required to supervise this process. What is the local authority's position? I imagine the position is going to be, we haven't got any money to be paying you anymore. You've got the infection control grant, and that's what this is for. I'm not pretending that we're going to get a positive answer, but we are asking that question, because I think, Eddie, you posted that on the WhatsApp group, didn't you, as well, if I recall? That how are we going to staff this with trained people? Could I, if you wouldn't mind, it's 3 o'clock and we'll pass through, we're already over the hour, conscious that people are busy. Well, I do need to collect some information from you about questions around visiting, so we can give the local authority a chance to process this and ask for advice. Could I ask that you bang into the chat bar any questions that you've got around the visiting guidance or policy, that we can pose them this afternoon? As I said at the start of the call, we've already got questions around the lateral flow device, the use of it, the staffing of it. Other providers have asked questions around the use of PPE, and does hand hygiene equate to gloves? That if we're allowing hugging, that can a visitor go through a communal area to get to the bedroom? If there's anything else that you've read in the guidance that you're unsure of, now's the chance to put in the questions so we can ask them. Other than that, we probably should let Guy go. We've only booked an hour's time, but Guy, thank you very much for coming. Did you guys find that useful? I hope you did. Yeah. Guy is kindly agreeing to join us again on Monday at 3 o'clock. So please do spend the weekend crunching more and more questions. If you do have other questions that need posing, if I could ask that you email them to info@devoncarehomes.org, we can provide Guy with some notice on the topics to brief himself on. Guy has got a presentation on IPC, which we are hoping he'll be able to run through on Monday's call, as well as us being joined by DCC and the CCG on Monday around visiting. Other than that, thank you very much for joining and taking your time. Any questions around visiting, please do put them in the chat bar or on the WhatsApp group. That'd be much appreciated. Otherwise, we'll see you on Monday.
Cheers, guys. Take care. Thanks again.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.